So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Pulse Market Earth Day webinar. Today, I'm lucky to be joined by a panel of experts and visionaries to discuss Earth Day and the 2022 theme of investing in our planet. Before we start, I think it's worth mentioning why Pulse is involved in this, why we're hosting, and what Earth Day means to us. So we have been in existence for just over a year now. And when we founded the business, the four co-founders, myself, Michael O'Shea, John Ellis, and David Lewis, had three core principles that we looked at when running a business. One was obviously to be a successful business. We wanted to have fun and enjoy doing it. And the third was about doing good. So we picked up the ESG baton. And when we started looking at that, we found it so broad and so deep that we had trouble deciding where to start, quite frankly. What we did then was we decided to look for help, and we were authentic about our challenges. We were lucky enough to have a blank sheet of paper to work off, unlike other companies who have to look and change and pivot when it comes to ESG, but we still didn't know what our starting point should be. So we created an ESG working group, and we brought people in from primarily the financial services industry, Tier 1, Tier 2 asset managers, insurers, fintech, regtech companies, and consultants. And when we started that discussion, that journey, we came up with what would be the most pertinent point to help companies we work with and companies within our community. That led to us creating what we term the Pulse ESG Passport. And very simply, that's a 20-question self-assessment that people can go through and start the journey within ESG. It's the entirety of ESG, not just the environmental side. It covers everything. And one thing we're going to do today, and the reason I mention this, is we're giving that to everybody who's attending the webinar today. So when the webinar is finished, you'll receive an email giving you a link so you can access the passport. I recommend you go through the entirety of the passport, the 20 questions. It only takes 15, 20 minutes, because what you get at the end is the important results and the content you get there. So I will look forward to seeing everybody doing that. To introduce the panel, I'm not going to go into details about everybody. We have Amy Doole from Booth Welsh, Ellie MacDonald from Eco Group, David Reed from Fuel Change, Gavin Tweedy from Net Zero Nation, and David MacDonald from Auditel. Now, these are, as I say, visionaries, practitioners, and experts in the industry. I've spoken to them all on these topics, and you'll see why during the webinar. They're driven by purpose and passion on this topic. So to start off, I think when we began this, we looked at Earth Day, and for me, I really questioned what's Earth Day all about. It's been around for 50 plus years now, and I was kind of surprised when I saw that, because in school growing up, I didn't really hear much about it. Now, I know it's primarily driven in the US and the UK, so being from Ireland, that's probably a good reason, but I know even my children aren't taught about it in school. So maybe to kick off, I'd like to ask the panel, and if I come to you, maybe David Reed first, what does Earth Day mean in 2022? What did it mean back then? I know we created the EPA through Earth Day. What's the journey been like? But is it more pertinent and relevant today than it was 50 years ago? Not that you're of the age that you'd know that.
Anyway, firstly, good morning, everyone. And John, delighted to be part of the panel. And what Earth Day means for me is I've been called either an expert or a visionary. So that's a fantastic start. I don't know where you're aiming there, John, but I'll take it, whatever that happens to be. Earth Day, I started Fuel Change along with my co-founder. It was only a year and a half ago. And I'm being perfectly honest, before that, I'd barely heard of Earth Day. So when someone asks me what does Earth Day means for me, I don't think it means that much, if I'm being honest and frank. And by that, I mean, if you're not involved in this to a degree, then I'm not so sure it resonates with too many out there. And it might resonate with that, relatively small percentage of those who are very well involved around decarbonisation and climate change discussions. And maybe, when we're looking at just now, lots of young people in particular that we're speaking to, and how does climate change resonate for them, then talking about Earth Day and the likes actually turns them off a wee bit. So I think if Earth Day is going to have an impact. And the good news is we are here speaking today because of Earth Day, right? So let's give it a good nod in a direction that said it has us speaking and it is a reason for us to be here. I think Earth Day should be an opportunity to think about the next generation and what it really means for them. And by it really means we need to take some of these more difficult subjects and deal with them properly, and not aim maybe at some of the more activist approach of, polarization. We need to make this real for people. And I think Earth Day should be around proper talk about transition. What does it actually mean? What does this mean for people's futures? How can this be a really positive for people's future? How do we turn this into something that actually we should be less scared of, but get on with it right now? So less banging of the drum and more realistic conversations, especially with the next generation, because they're the ones that are going to have to change the culture and adapt and adopt to the future. So that would be what Earth Day means for me, John, if and at least we're here speaking about it, which is a real positive.
And maybe let's look at it from a different side. Amy, I know, you're probably, no offense, David, you're probably on social media more than David would be, but, what's the message out there? What are people saying about Earth Day? Is it something that's being talked about?
Yeah, I totally get what David's saying about that resonance. We live in such a environment now where information is all around us. We need to cut through the noise and have communications that are meaningful. I think the appeal of it's wrong. We need to grasp people's attention with it. Literally, if you put an Earth Day into Google, you're going to get this like stock image that comes up with someone with a handful of dirt with some sort of plant growing out it. It's not sexy, it's not relevant, it's not inspiring. And I think even looking at hashtags, etc. on social media this morning, big influencers aren't speaking about it, and it needs to be embedded into communications in a way that reaches and resonates with their followers. We live in a world that's all about the aesthetics today, and I think we need to feed into that, and that probably means getting, for example, the Kim Kardashians of this world behind it, and thinking about how we actually put that message out there in a way that's appealing and is able to grab momentum.
I think so. Okay, Amy, you touched on messaging there, and I think this is vital to the whole discussion, because I don't think people en masse disagree with the message, with the facts. There will always be some people who will argue with it, but en masse people believe in the facts. The messaging itself, do we have an issue there where, I suppose, David, you mentioned talking at people. Amy, you mentioned who's making that message and who's crafting that message. And I liken it to, maybe it's not a messaging issue, maybe it's a brand issue. Trump was a brand, Brexit was a brand. As I said to some of you guys yesterday, Bremain never became a brand. Hillary Clinton was a person, not a brand. Do we have to look at it from that context, really? I don't know, Ellie, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally think, going back to David, I never had Earth Day mentioned at school, ever, at university, ever. It's only because I personally have an interest in it, and I am on social media and I can see all of this. So, I think that we do need to rebrand it. We've been speaking about this. I mean, Earth Day was set up in 1970. And in 1970, there was no EPA, there was no Clean Air Act, there was no Water Act, there was no legal or regulatory mechanisms at all. So we have come some distance, but you know what, when that was originally started, there was a movement. And I think we've lost that movement. Originally, Earth Day was set up because I think it was Senator Nelson who originally founded it. There was a massive oil spillage, and there was tens of thousands of people in the streets. It captured people's passion and it ignited that flame for saying that's not right. And I just honestly feel that that flame has died out. And I think that we can see we've been overexposed by media. We see all these charities of various different countries and the challenges they have. We see the polar bear on the iceberg, but you know what, I think we're overexposed to it, and I don't think it has the impact that shock tactic that it once had. But I do think that we need to use it as a tool for education, and we need to somehow make this sexy again for the TikTokers of the world who have the 9-second reel. Is somebody going to scroll past it? Okay, well, what do we need to do? We need to do some investigation to find out how we can make this relevant and how we can bring this up as a proper topic. And
is it potentially, and Dave McDonald, I'll ask you this, is it also the challenge, not just what the message is, but the distance this is away. And Gavin, you know where I'm going here. This is one of your favorite analogies. When we were having a chat, it reminded me of an episode of Father Ted. And for those who don't know Father Ted, the program, it's a comedy show based in Ireland. And Father Ted was explaining to his colleague Dougal about this cow, toy cow, being small, and the one in the field out there being far away, and trying to get him to understand the difference between the two. And with climate change, it's far away for a lot of people. It's 10 years, 20 years, it's 2050, it's 2100. And how do we get people to understand the impact of bring that cow up to the window and see it right in front of you? And it's quite scary when you look at it that way. You know, is it that, David?
Yeah, John, I guess a couple of things for me. One is, you know, this whole idea that young people need to be brought forward is really important. I think the DFE just a couple of days ago announced a new GCSE, so they're developing the curriculum towards a natural history GCSE, which is a sign, I suppose, of a formal recognition that the literacy required around climate, carbon emissions, carbon accounting, the importance of all of that, the impact of all of that is being formally recognised and brought into our education system. You know, and the energy, I think, is still there, but it's in pockets. I don't disagree, Ellie, that there's there's a little bit of overload, maybe an overexposure, as you put it, towards some of these things in a time where there's such a lot competing for headlines in news desks, you know, so formal news broadcasts, etc., talking about all of the things of the day. How to keep this current and important when, in fact, the language has been expressed in such a way that it is, from the very instance of the legal commitment back in 2019 by Theresa May to say, you know, the UK will undertake to get to net zero by 2050. That sounds like a long way in the future. How do you bring that? How do you make that immediate and engender the kind of action that is required? There is, I think, a growing urgency, and Earth Day itself is one of those kind of set piece events that occur on a regular basis, an annual basis, among a few other things that tries to keep it in the consciousness. So it's really pleasing that we're sitting around having a discussion about Earth Day today on Earth Day 2022, and kind of reflecting on some of the stuff that I did this time last year. You know, we have come a distance, and I think the pace of change is accelerating. So kind of, whilst it's difficult, I think, to maintain that focus, I think there are certainly things, there's certainly a willingness for people to get engaged. Nobody really disagreeing that the messaging is important and the direction of travel is right for us. But it is a continual challenge, how to reinvent the message, how to communicate it clearly. And I think that the instant that we take our foot off the accelerator on that, the second we stop trying, other things come into our news day and swamp us.
Let me bring another thing in there, and we hadn't really discussed this as a panel before, but I'm going to throw it out there. So keeping people's attention, we had COP26, which was considered a massive event. We had only weeks ago the UN, the IPCC coming out with the now or never statement. And even that's forgotten. And Amy, or Ellie, I think you mentioned, you know, the aesthetic of it. When I looked at Irish television and the news, when that statement was made, we had, and I took a picture of this, a poor old guy called Dermot, who was in a farm somewhere where he looked like he was in a conservatory growing mushrooms. And that's not the image I think that's going to really drive this forward anymore. There's nothing wrong with any of that, and it's not any organics, but does this need to become more professional? Does this need to become business driven? And I'll use the term hard-nosed, for profit maybe even. But Gavin, come in here and give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, again, first of all, thanks for joining today. It's brilliant to be here on Earth Day with you guys. Yeah, the big thing here is about addressing mainstream society, right? So this Earth Day has been around for a long time, but unless you work in the sustainability domain, you probably haven't heard about it. But COP26 events like it are bringing it more into mainstream consciousness. But what we need to do is make action accessible to everyone. through programs of behavioural change, the work that Fuel Change is doing to make young people more aware of taking control of their future. And then the area I focus on a lot is to say, well, we've got 364,000 SMEs in Scotland, and 70% of SMEs were found in a survey by a Bank of Scotland survey this year to not have a net zero plan yet. So there's a lot of enthusiasm out there to start your net zero journey. People just don't know how to do it. And actually, it's almost like there's multiple pathways, up, down, left, and right. And as a business, you're asking yourself, well, why should I do this? So to the hard-nosed reasons, it's about, unless this is good for your business, right, in terms of it makes you more competitive, more compliant, makes your brand stronger, helps you attract the workforce of the future. Quite frankly, for most people, it's an inconvenience, it's a cost, it's a distraction. And our job here in events like this is to allow people to recognise, actually, this is a brilliant opportunity to take a leadership position in the market. And we'll discuss that. You know, and one of the reasons I'm glad to have Amy here on the call today is Booth Welch is one company that is doing that, that's recentering away from a profit-only agenda, which caused climate change, to focusing more on balancing people, planet, and profit.
That's interesting. Amy, give us some context around that, because you're a practitioner now, really, in this field. You're looking at the ideal organization to influence change across other groups, potentially.
Yeah, and as an engineer and technology business, we work in the process industries, you know, with a lot of food and bev clients, you know, oil and gas, you know, nuclear, etc. So we need to be part of that solution and supporting our supply chain to get on board and make change. You know, and I think that's what we need to see, that businesses need to recognise that they are the problem, but they're also the solution. And I think, as Gavin said, you know, there's a lot of support and communities and networks, etc. out there. And it's just knowing how to lean into that and actually kind of experiment a bit. You know, I've met Gavin and David, particularly through Fuel Change and the Net Zero Nation, back just around COP26, and we've just really tried to lean in. And actually, we've done a lot over the last sort of few months in realigning our own company purpose and our rewriting an actual mission. And today, as a business, we've settled on the idea of, through collaboration, we want to engineer a better future. You know, and that's quite a bold statement. It's quite a scary statement, actually. But you know, I think if you look at some of the problems that we've got today in the world, you know, attracting and retaining the right resource and talent, you know, looking at some stats in this, you know, it's been noted that over 70% of people will stay with a business if they've got a sustainability plan in place. Your Generation Z and the workforce of the future are prioritising purpose over salary today. You know, over 50% say they want a societal impact in their job. You know, and I think there's a big opportunity for this to be seen as something that makes good business sense, and it's an opportunity rather than it being a distraction or something that we don't want to get behind.
You've reminded me of something, Amy, and it is Earth Day. It's actually kind of happy birthday, Earth. It's not meant to be us or me in particular giving out about and, you know, stating the problems. You've just kind of stated the positive nature about it, and Gavin as well there. And maybe let's look at that for a second and pivot into, you know, who can make the most impact and where the solutions potentially should come from. And if we look at it, you know, people always challenge how much individuals can do, how much SMEs can do. Is it about the corporates? Is it about the government? Is it about regulation? Where do we think the most impact can come from, or is it across the board? Now, I'll go back to David Reid there and give us your thoughts on that.
Sure, thanks, John. You know, great conversation. And one point I've just gathered also about who can make an impact. On this call just now, and it's absolutely the heart of this, there's two organisations, both ECO and Booth Welch on the call that we know, but we've connected them together, and now they're speaking about business. So that connection between different businesses who are following that process and are doing good and doing well at the same time, then that's going to become its own ecosystem. And the more you're in that ecosystem, that will become the predominant ecosystem, I believe. I don't know if I like the term ecosystem, but here I've used it anyway, right? So forgive me. So I think corporates and businesses in the business world will ultimately drive this. But then I look at supply and demand. And if we look at supply and demand, what are we doing in fuel change? And why have I continued with this is, when you speak to the next generation, they will change culture. Every time our culture changes, it comes because the next generation decides that what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable, they will decide and they will drive it. I find that every day. I have a 22-year-old son, right, who will pull me up anytime I step out of line. He's getting his own back now for 22 years of pain, right? So he's taking it out on me now, but I get that. So, but they're always the ones that decide that you don't say that, Dad, or don't do this. So they'll drive culture from the bottom up. We need to spend a lot more time with our next generation in a purposeful way, I'd suggest. You know, David talked about taxonomy. You know, let's make the phraseology accessible, right? Let's not it be an elite sport. Let it be something for everyone that understands. Another thing is, you know, human behavior is what's in it for me. So there has to be something in it for the next generation for them to grab this and say, you know, this is my future. And one thing I've been finding over the past year and a half, when you speak to most next generational individuals about climate change, as I mentioned before, they're generally speaking disengaged because they don't think they can make a difference. If you talk to them about their career and opportunities and their future and exposure, then they're all ears. So I think that's really interesting. They're worried about their future, worried about their exposure. Let's give them that opportunity and at the same time take this whole cultural shift with them.
I think, David, we've got recent and maybe a little bit further back evidence of success in that regard. I think in Ireland, I think we were the first country to bring in a smoking ban, and people thought, my God, you're going to have a war when this happens. But it policed itself. People picked it up, and you no longer walk into a building and light up a cigarette. It was self-policing. The people made the impact. COVID also, and I more liken that to maybe the corporate stroke government side of things, countries that disagreed with each other managed to work together to get through COVID. So there are naysayers who believe things can't be done, but quite frankly, I think it's been proved otherwise. It's just about getting it done. You know, David McDonald, thoughts on that, thoughts on where SMEs and corporations and governments sit in this whole discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think my own view is that everyone has a responsibility and a role to play. You know, so today we're lucky enough to live in a Western liberalized democracy. We vote for them, in other words. So, you know, if we feel that it's not our job and that it's the government's job, we lose. You know, I think we need to be keeping, you know, a consistent pressure on policymakers and lawmakers and all the rest of it to ensure that the kind of direction that we want to go in is used to prioritise. So in terms of the impact, I mean, I have worked in policy before. I've had sessions with Treasury, and I've had sessions in Portcullis House with MPs at the time of setting up the original renewables obligation. My background being in renewable energy, really. So I get frustrated by the slow pace of change amongst policymakers. Our politicians are very, very fond of social media and sound bites and sloganeering, etc. So all of those things that came out around COP26, all very nice to listen to. But then there's a gap, and we're still sitting in the gap, as it were, between those statements being made and the political capital being gained, and the policy that follows on from that. You know, but you know, it will follow, and I do think that there's, you know, with you know, a constant effort to keep it in focus, with people speaking the truth on the floor of the House of Commons. All of those things need to kind of come together to drive the right kind of policies. Having said that, you know, having set that framework, businesses do need to make sure that they are responsible enough to be aware of those things and to start acting, because they can act and they can have a real impact. So from the smallest SME up to the largest corporate, that responsibility is really bearing. COP26 was interesting in the sense that there was a whole slew of announcements and undertakings from major corporates, globals, etc. You know, that sets a tone. And when you think about how carbon emissions are measured, each one of those huge corporate global entities is relying on its supply chain, its tier 2 suppliers and smaller suppliers in its supply chain. So once those undertakings are given at such a large corporate global level, it can't help but ripple down. It can't help but become important for the smaller SMEs, etc., who are part of that second tier supply chain to engage. So I think all of that is really quite important. But at the bottom of the chain, we as individuals cannot duck from the responsibility that we each have. As I say, we're lucky enough to live in a liberal democracy. We can vote for what we want. Maybe it's not frequently enough, my opinion, but
may not always get it.
but yeah, exactly. You don't always get what you want. I know that, but our responsibility really is to make sure that we're not a bystander in all of this. That each of us has a really important role to play in socializing the issues, communicating those issues clearly, and influencing people. I'm not the greatest influencer in the world, and I don't disagree for a second, Ellie, that we should be getting some of the big guns with big followings to try and come up with some consistent messaging. For one thing, it's good for their brand as well. Let's get them on board.
I do know, I just remind people, I'm just looking at the chat here, and there are people talking about influencers and ambassadors and the need for that. I think it is important. We've talked about kind of community. Dave, you touched on it there about Amy and Ellie working together. I know, Gavin, we touched on this before about having a venue, a place. Now, Pulse Market, that's one of the things we look to do, is give people a venue where people who are, and it's part of the passport, people who are looking to position themselves and identify themselves as taking steps in the right direction. And I do mean beginning that journey, because it's a long journey. It is really important. Yourself, Net Zero Nation, you've got a process where you're bringing cohorts together in a similar way.
Yeah, one of the things, if we look at fossil fuels, have made a tremendous impact on the human race, principally because of its convenience and the economic value it's generated, right? So if we're going to tackle net zero, commercial value needs to underpin it. It's not going to come from a public sector initiative. It's because we can see genuine business value from it. So what we've set out to do is to say, how can we make climate action something that makes your business better, your business stronger? So how can we help you become a stronger brand by building on the model of business for good is good for business? So we put a programme together, a Net Zero Nation, which is about helping SMEs start their net zero journey, but it's framed around economic value, right? It's framed around the legislation is saying today, if you're a business of above a certain size in the UK, you must disclose your carbon accounts annually, your director's report, and that will flow down the supply chain. So as an SME feeding into that, you've got a choice. You can be a follower or a leader. What we've started to do is to enable SMEs to gain that SECR certification that the large companies are on the hook for, so they can take a leadership position and be compliant and be competitive. Because procurement is what a lot of businesses talk to us about. We've got over 1,000 members in our net zero community in Scotland today. And they tell us winning tenders is hard because it's a race to the floor in price. We've got to bring carbon into the criteria. And conversations like this today are about raising awareness. If people are making purchase decisions in the future, they have to factor people, planet and profit. So we need to see more scorecards around procurement around this. Paul Johnston, who's one of the guys who's in our community, has raised this, that if you want to become more competitive in tenders, you need to demonstrate your authenticity. So you can't self-certify. You need someone to come and independently validate what you're saying is true, so there's no greenwashing. There's a tremendous amount of distrust. So the journey we've created is to give businesses an ability to implement carbon accounts, doing it in groups of 10. Don't do it by yourself. Don't be isolated. Come together in groups of 10, learn from each other, share your progress, share in the mission. And that's one of the things that Amy from Booth Welsh is doing today, is to use that to take a leadership position in the market and influence where things are going. So again, I'd invite Amy to say a few words on that. Why did you get involved?
So we've just started on the first net zero accelerator, and we've actually tried to pull a number of people across the business in different roles to be a part of it, because I think it's really important for us to allow everybody in the business to understand where we're going with it and why we're doing it and how they've got to play their part, you know, for example, across finance, across innovation, technology development. You know, this can be a real differentiation point for us. And as Gavin said, you know, making a brand stand out in a different way. And I think, you know, being a little bit selfish about it, we've been working in the digitalization innovation space for a good number of years. We've got a lot of technology that we really believe in and solutions that we can essentially help clients in a supply chain remove carbon from their business in a clever way. And this is an actual opportunity for us to come into a safe place and market area where we can actually test that market with like-minded clients and people, and I kind of understand that. You know, I think from our point of view, we've coined a term now, environment 4.0, which we see this as an evolution of industry 4.0. You know, it's really about utilising innovative digital technology to actually help us meet our sustainability goals, as well as create better efficiencies and business improvements. And I think really telling that story that you don't have to have this trade-off between, you know, people, planet and profit. You know, it can all be done simultaneously. You know, we've put quite a lot of new technologies in place for clients, and been able to really showcase a real return in investment in this just now. You know, remote support technology, digital twins, you know, data monitoring. There's a lot of sort of solutions that are out there. And again, that's something that we've been very much welcome to explore and support, and that sort of accelerator area that Gavin's talking about, which for us is a fantastic way of understanding where we fit and our relevance and continuing to meet the needs of our future clients. And I think the other thing I'd say about that is it's also connected into businesses who are thinking the same, and we're starting to connect and seek businesses that have the same values as us. And I think that's going to be what we're going to look to see from businesses going forward.
Very interesting. And there's 2 points that have come through in the last discussions, one about from Dave McDonald about supply chain, and one from you, Amy, about technology, that I want to come back to, because I think they're both very important to this discussion. Well, we've got some questions coming in the chat, and there's one from Fiona here, and it's kind of related to, Amy, what you were talking about there, and kind of Gavin introducing you. You made a decision to, you know, change and to make change happen in your organization. The question is how can we instill the urgency for change that this requires? It feels like we're going around in circles and at the edges and not going all in with the conviction to change the real world. This is kind of nearly, it's like the, can we have a COVID moment and go all out in this, maybe?
Yeah.
Who wants to take it, guys? I'm going to leave this one open, because it is the big question. It's, you know, how do we make the difference between small groups doing something to a mass movement? And is that ambassadors? Is it messaging? Is it pressure from government?
There's a growing pressure that we've seen, actually, John, in the last 18 months, and it's around the energy complex. It's actually around what we see happening in Russia, Ukraine right now. I've been talking to prospects and clients for 4 or 5 years about behind the meter energy investments. The last, so things like PV, solar PV, behind the meter, things that will help the organisation to both reduce cost and increase resilience. So, you know, that has become a trickle of interest, and it's now turned into a bit of a tidal wave, because of the fact that, you know, there are those other strong economic drivers. And just like COVID did for things like flexible working, so too the energy crisis, the price hike that we've seen in gas particularly, has really proved to be a hugely motive force for organisations to make decisions. So we're now seeing that particular market is busier now than it has ever been, in my memory at least. You know, and I think that is the sort of thing that has really made it's driven home the need for energy independence, resilience, as it were, amongst organisations. They see this as a genuine threat now. I used to go through budget setting rounds on energy supply within a large FTSE organisation. You know, that was a challenge at the time. But I would hate to be sitting in the hot seat today where I'm faced with a 400 or 500% increase in my energy costs, that exposure. So, you know, it's one of those things which, in a sense, if there is a silver lining to the energy crisis over the last 6 months within the business community, it is now that it's proving to be a real catalyst for change. People are seeing it written large in profit and loss accounts, in profit center reporting. They're saying, my goodness, we need to do something about this. We need to actually think about it. Let's dust off those project proposals that David McDonald put on my desk 18 months or 2 years ago and let us get him to do something about it. So, and it comes back, I think, Gavin, to what you were saying, is what is motivating organizations to actually make decisions, to make investment decisions, to change behaviors and to reprioritize the things that they are. There is this huge convergence in the middle in terms of business decision making and value judgment. This piece in the middle, which actually is really well aligned, something that is good for the environment is also good for your bottom line. You know, and that's what we have seen. You know, we're seeing 30–40% internal rates of return on investment projects, infrastructure projects in organizations of all sizes, you know, because they're choosing to think in a slightly different way. So I think that that's really important. You're talking about how do we get people to move now? You know, that's you know, making sure that we can communicate that, clearly set it out in a business case, and underline the benefits that come along with the kind of the wider ESG conversation with the financial, the cost savings and the extra profit resilience. If you've got a strong physical hedge, in the sense that you've got energy infrastructure on site, a strong physical hedge against future price rises, you know, that's a good thing for a business. That's building resilience in a business.
And looking to create that movement, David, because David Reid, you spoke about empowering the youth to create the solutions to the problems that we've created and driving it from, let's call that the bottom up, if we can, but
yeah.
also the potential in supply chain to bring it from top down. So, you know, part of what we discussed with the ESG working group was, can we get something that we can feed through the system from entities, and this is kind of going to the large corporates maybe for a while, who have thousands of suppliers, where they can issue something simple, something basic, something that starts people on the journey, to then have them pass it on to their suppliers and create what we kind of are terming a waterfall effect, and getting mass movement that way, akin to, David, what you're talking about from the youth upwards.
Sure. I mean, if I'm being a wee bit controversial, then I have a slight issue with ESG. I have an issue with ESG because because, you know, 2 years ago we weren't talking about ESG, we were talking about CSR. And lots of companies want to tick the ESG box and say, there they are, I've done it. I'm going to be a bit tired of that. Right, I'm looking for action, and action which is, David made a great point, burning platforms change decision makers. Burning platforms are energy costs. Burning platforms are food poverty right now. Burning platforms are fuel poverty right now in the cost of living. Now, I believe that lots of solutions to the climate crisis, as David said, will absolutely address some of these points. And another thing, when we speak to the next generation, lots, all they hear is, and they point at me, so 55 is a number, if you're looking for that, I'm at. So I do outlive Earth Day, John. I know you mentioned that Earth Day.
Who would have thought?
But the fact is, what our next generation here is, you're going to stop traveling and flying, you're going to stop driving, you're going to stop eating meat. So they're saying, hold on, how does this work? Right? And then we look at developing nations, and we also talk to them about what they're not going to do. All that's just wrong, I believe. If we believe this properly, and all of these comments we've had about what's good for business, making businesses better, allowing the next generation to drive that bottom up. The supply chain for me are bottom up, not top down. Some of our absolute best talent out there is hidden. So let's get our talent out there, give them the opportunity and the platform, and you know what? They come up with fantastic solutions. When they're engaged, they'll then drive that right through businesses. And you know, a lot of what we want to talk about, I think, should be about action, positive action, great opportunities to highlight people that are doing good things that improve businesses. And when you improve a business, you know what, to do more of it. You know, David's point about what's good for business, we need to grasp with that. The discussion about transition and oil and gas, let's have a real conversation about it. We need oil and gas for a long time. So saying just stop using fossil fuel is a nonsense discussion.
And David, let's remember, it is Mother Earth's birthday, so let's cheer people up now for a minute.
No, that's what I'm saying. But there's a real positive here is, let's transition to something fantastic. Let's start doing things, not stop doing things.
I totally agree with you, and David. And when we started on this, I was asked to write a blog about ESG, and one of the things that kind of made me fearful was being authentic within the process. And I think this is a challenge for industry, for individuals. And it was what you mentioned a second ago. I like fillet steak. You know, Ireland as a country, our biggest emissions come through cattle. Cattle disappear. I'm kind of going, I'm not really a big fan of doing that. But, and this is a transition into technology, we can potentially find solutions to a lot of these things that we're afraid of. And we can and should allow firms and individuals to kind of take the mantle of it's okay not to be okay. It's okay if you were a company that did X, Y, or Z, and it's okay if you were an individual who did X, Y, and Z, but let's look at the future. Let's take today as day zero and move forward. And maybe let's talk the technology side of things, because I've heard many times on many podcasts and everything that the technology does not exist to solve the problems, to bring us to where we need to be. And Ellie, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, you know what, I totally disagree. I totally think that the technology is out there. So to give a bit of a background about me and where I work for a company called Eco, and we're a group of solution-led businesses. So we have 12 businesses that all came under the Eco brand. And about 2.5 years ago, we started to see that one of the solutions that our clients needed was environmental, was carbon reduction. So what we started investing in is actually, we're quite unique. What I find is, and this is something that came up earlier, I feel that one of the problems is that people work in silos. I have solar, I've got this solution, but we're not working together. Okay, great. Well, what happens if all these minds come together and we actually share these technologies? So something that basically evolved is Eco Go Zero. And the real difference there is that we are collaborating with several partners. So we're basically a carbon removal partner, and we have significant portfolio of 30 plus solutions that ranging from domestic right through to industrial. But the one point about technology is that a lot of this technology has been around. So if I look at some of the top, we've spoken about farmers, there is technology out there to remove methane from a lot of the cattle. So good news, you know, technology can keep you eating your lovely steaks that you have in your barbecue. You know, there are the good news is out there. But I just think that actually when we're talking about investing in the planet, for me, we need to be investing in technology. We need to be investing in education. And you know what? If we look back, this is a revolution. This is the next revolution. We've had many revolutions in the past, and you know, we've had to change and adapt. Our mindsets have had to change. And so one of the things that I was having a conversation earlier in the week, you know, some of these solutions that are out on the market at the moment, they're not going to be maybe the solutions that we have in 10 years, but you know what, we need to make a change. We need to start somewhere. Look at the evolution of a car. Look at the evolution of your telephones. I mean, I haven't been around as long, you know, Earth Day is more new for me maybe than it is for David, as he quite rightly said. But, you know, I had a 3310, one of my first phones, but look at the phones now. You know, I don't need to buy a camera anymore. I've got internet. Look at the evolution. We need to be investing and knowing and having an open mindset, an early adoption mindset. You know, we are all early adopters. We're talking about this. We've been speaking about what makes the change. Well, the change is the technology. There is a lot that's been uncovered. And I think for us, a lot of the things that we found is that collaboration is key, absolutely vital. So what we're able to bring to the collaboration is that we're able to have a route to market. But some of the people we work with are maybe scientists, they maybe have a background, they had an idea, but they don't know how to bring it all together. So for us, we've just got this big circular solution of all these different problems and solutions. And so when we're talking about solving all these things and who solves the problem, I think I've maybe been able to pull all these questions together somehow. But, you know, when we're talking about who solves these problems, well, we need investment, we need the government to be making policies, we need the individuals to be making the decisions that change needs to happen. Small businesses need to be, you know, pushing the argument as well. It's all our responsibility. And if we all do something, I would much rather having hundreds of millions of people doing something imperfectly rather than 1,000 people do it perfectly. So I suppose what I'm saying is we need to make movement, we need to actually do action, and technology is the biggest lever that we can do to make all that happening. We don't need to stop some of these things. We need to look at alternatives. You know, at the end of the day, the gas crisis, as David quite rightly mentioned, is significant in this country. Well, let's find some solutions of alternatives that are on the market. How can we mobilize them? Where is the investment going to come from? And I think one of the things that, you know, we mentioned tenders earlier on as well. You know, tenders are very, very written and are very, very narrow. And they lead the market down a very narrow path, and they're not opening up the wider market for alternatives that are out there. You know, there's some amazing small businesses out there that are doing such innovative things. And I know, you know, I've had conversations with David and Gavin, and when they've had their challenges, you know, it's often the youth who can come up with a really simple solution. Technology doesn't need to be super complicated. It can be a really simple solution for a very big problem. And so I just think that, you know, investment in technology is essential. And we are a credit to that. You know, we have such a big portfolio of solutions through collaboration, and that technology, that some of the things that we're doing, can remove significant amounts of carbon, but it's such a simple idea.
But I tell you, Ellie, I'm holding a phone in my hand that begins with an I, and people know well what it is. And I would consider myself your simple test case, because I don't care how iOS 14.1.19, whatever it is, works. I don't care how blockchain works. And I explained this to colleagues in a previous life when they were developing a platform. What I need to know is that I push this button on my phone and I get the European Tour golf results, or I get the US PGA results, or I get the news. I'm that lazy. I just want what I want. So what technology in my mind needs to do is give me that button and make it easy.
So one of the things that you mentioned there is seeing is believing. So we need to be able to open up the market. We need to be able to showcase the amazing, innovative ideas, you know, whether it's an idea, whether you've got a product to market. Actually, maybe what we need to do is we need to be having more platforms for people to be able to share more ideas, and through collaboration, maybe they can get to market, because not everybody is going to be able to have from concept of idea through to, you know, getting it through to market. But if we all collaborate together, there's going to be an avenue to make more movement. So, you know, I think seeing is believing. The reason the phone with the eye, you know, you have seen that maybe your neighbor, when you went to the shop, someone showed you how to do it. Seeing is believing. But the problem is, how can we see a lot of these things? We can't see air pollution. You know, we're breathing that in. We can't see it. So we need to be able to mobilize this and make it much more.
You remember, Amy, I had my fear of that company when it was a programming company and they made you write everything yourself. I never wanted to work with them then. But to move on, there's a lot of people in the kind of questions talking about in the chat room, talking about movements and things like that. And Gavin, I'm going to go back to our Father Ted thing. I think it's time that we actually mobilize this. And maybe I'm thinking while we were speaking there about, do you remember when they came up with it's the economy stupid in Bill Clinton's campaign? I don't know who it was. It was one of his aides who came up with it, I think Carlisle or Carvel or somebody. We could bring out it's about the cow stupid, or maybe leave the stupid out, brand the t-shirts, create a movement, Gavin. You see where I'm going there? It's a movement.
Yeah. If I took coffee.
I'm getting messages from marketing now saying don't milk that.
Had to come.
But no, but you know, it's about branding. We've talked about a lot of things, but I think what the audience will get from this very clearly is the purpose and passion of the panelists here. And one of the things I will encourage after this, and we're happy to share the contact details of the people who've been here today, get engaged with these people, have discussions with them. These are not the individuals or companies who are talking at people. They want to talk with people and discuss things. To finish up, what I'd like to ask everybody, and I kind of gave you a little bit of a nod that I might do this, but each of you, if you can give me something that either individually or as a company you're most proud of that you did, that others listening to this could potentially pick up and go with, something you saw from another company, or even simply a wish for Earth Day, a realistic one, you know, not unicorns and things like that, but maybe if I start with Amy, who's on my top left.
Yeah, I think this conversation has been really powerful and really positive, I think, as well. And it really lets us see that there's a lot going out there that we can be part of, and we need to be excited about it and get behind it. So I think thinking about, for me, it's probably quite a simple one. And I think it's about that mindset shift that we need to do. You know, I think everyone waking up to their individual impact in some way. You know, for change to happen that's going to be meaningful, we need to have changes in the way we think, you know, we act, we behave. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's quite a hard thing to do. And I love that I'm part of a business that's actually trying to understand how we can embed it into a reason for being, and how we sort of collaborate together and engineer a better future. And I think, just maybe this is a bit cheesy, but, you know, looking at that kind of wish and magic type theme, you know, a phrase that I love, you know, that Cinderella says that, you know, have courage and be kind. You know, there's no planet B. And I think that practicing compassion and care for people and things around us, collaborating openly, you know, being humble, trying new things, experimenting, is going to give us that best chance of getting there and making those changes we need to save the future of the planet.
Brilliant. Ellie?
I think joining at the dots. You know, it's about collaboration. It's about bringing together people, bringing together technologies and solutions that all have, you know, the focus that we're all speaking about today. You know, having a collaborative approach is like a knowledge share. You know, we all have different backgrounds, skill sets. We all come from, you know, different backgrounds. So, you know, for me, it's joining up the dots and bringing it all together, holding hands, and not in that hippie kind of way where we're all tree hugging, but, you know, actually let's collaborate, because my strength, Amy's strength, Gavin's strength, David's strength, you know, all of us together, bring it together and you're going to have a much bigger force. And I think that's something that, you know, I think at EcoGo Zero, we've made some really strong foundations to set that up through collaboration. But if there's anything that I could say to everybody else, you know, continue to join up the dots. You know, don't be afraid to share something and collaborate and join with other people, because for us, it's we feel that we can make a difference by doing that, because just one person can't make a difference, but if we all join up, we're going to make a much bigger impact.
That does hit the point. Gavin?
Well, I've really enjoyed this panel, and I think we're all creatures of influence. So I've kind of two levels of things I take inspiration from. I've been involved in field change for over a year now. I'm inspired by the actions of young people that fill me with confidence. So Vicky and Ryan from GE Aviation, Sean McLeod from BSW, were in the Apprentice of the Year as a result of the impact they took through field change challenges. That generation gives me hope, gives me inspiration that what we're doing, we need to keep doing more of it. I'm also proud of the work that we're doing in the Net Zero Accelerator, where thought leaders have stepped forward, businesses like Booth Welsh, like Scott Direct, like Amy Britton, Harris Tweed, like Elsa Reliability Solutions, like Ceteris, like R3IoT, like Field Change. These organisations and many others who are stepping up and doing something, taking real action today, they influence others to think, do you know what? You can do it, we can do it. Let's all find a way to work together, and rather than just focus on our own agenda, figure out a way to connect each other's solutions together. And I'd like to see more businesses thinking about, look who's next door. Can you do business with someone local? Take the carbon miles out of the supply chain. That's an easy thing to do. Look around you, look up, look at the horizon, and stop just making it a race to the floor and price every time.
I'm loving this positive collaboration message coming through. David McDonald, I'll go to you next.
Thanks, John. Yeah, another positive thought for me. I hope it's positive, but you know, when I first started working in the energy complex in the UK here, renewable energy was a really, really small part, and I mean like 2 or 3% of the final supply volume. in the UK. And over the last, when I was looking at our records last Earth year, or Earth Day last year, we have decarbonised the energy complex hugely. So it's a message around technology, the rapid pace of change in technology. When the willingness is there, the innovation can come through if it's given the right kind of climate, the right environment. So I think we've taken something like 66% of the carbon in our electricity supply out over the last 7 years. That was up until Earth Day last year, when I last looked at that. And that's an important figure because it's an enabling thing. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about the challenges in front of us now, it's about decarbonising heat and it's about decarbonising transport. These are the two major issues that government energy policy now tries to address here in the UK, at least. That essentially means that we're going to have a much larger demand for electricity. So our job really must be to make sure that that electricity is coming from green and sustainable sources. We're very, very fortunate in the UK here, given our latitude, our position, etc., that we've got this massive fetch. We've got lots of windy stuff coming off the west coast of our islands here. So we've got a massive resource that we could tap much further. I'd love to see that building on the kind of successes in decarbonising the grid in the past up till now. That can continue. It also presents massive opportunities for nations, small nations like Scotland, to participate in that. So that pivot from supporting the oil industry, oil and gas exploration, etc., as that industry comes to a natural close over the next decades, we can marinize wind turbines. We can be out there using those skills and transferring them into an industry which is relevant for the future. So I would love to see, so building on that success, I'd love to see that continue going forward.
I think that's a brilliant positive message, and I would echo everything you say there for Ireland. I mean, even more so being right out there in the Atlantic. And David Reid, I'll come to you last.
Okay, thank you. So if I look at a proud moment, you asked, John, what examples have I got of proud moments? Gavin raised a couple. We're really fortunate in fuel change because we work with the next generation every day. And we've managed to uncover, not we, but they have managed to uncover some hidden gems. Some people that are in business, when you give them an opportunity to grab it. So, one example would be Forth Ports, good old company, probably, I would say not an aging workforce, but their predominant workforce is a wee bit older because that's the sector they're in. And they're a team in fuel change of their next generation, younger people. And I can talk about so many of these, by the way. I can talk about so many of these examples, but the Forth Ports team were magnificent. And the great thing is, Forth Ports now refer to them as their fuel change team, and they go and ask them about the future. They pose them questions about their business, and they've empowered them enough to have a real proper say in the future of their business. At least 2 of them have been promoted in the business and now report to a new role called Director of Energy in Forth Ports. So it's real movement. It is showing a cultural shift. And to be fair, I could talk about Booth Welsh. They've found some hidden gems, Nathan Patel down in Barrow and the likes. So my proud moments are actually the actions taken by our next generation. And one of my asks for the future is the next time we do this, and I hope that's soon, is replace me, right? Replace me with one of our team from out there, Nathan or Robert Mitchell-Moore or Amy Gertz or one of our next generation, and listen to them and let them have a say in this panel, because frankly, we are just providing a platform for their future. And that's a real positive message from me, because they'll solve this. They will solve it given the opportunity. So that would be my final thought.
No better way to finish on, David. And you know what? We might even keep you on the panel with them. But I think, all that remains for me to say is to thank everybody, Amy, Ellie, Gavin, David, and David, for participating today. We've discussed a lot, and I think you all know that we have a lot more questions. So it looks like we're going to be doing this again, and fairly soon, David, as you say. A message to the people listening to this and viewing this: the passport is going to be sent out to you. Have a look at it, go through it, do the 20 questions. It's really simple. We kind of designed this for ourselves, to help us start the journey, and have a think about how you can share that. I know community has been mentioned a few times. share that with your community, your supply chain, and see if you can help them start the journey as well. So that's the last message from me. Thank you, everybody, and look forward to the next one.
Thanks, John. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.